Hello and welcome back to The Unbelievables, hosted by your dynamic duo, Hassan and Aban.
Hello, everyone.
In today's episode, we're diving into a significant historical event shaped by censorship, the Tinker versus Des Moines Independent School District Supreme Court case. Later on, we'll be joined by a special guest, Nathan, who brings intriguing reflections and ideas about censorship to the table.
Yep, and without further ado, let's get started.
Now then, let's briefly dig into the background of the case. The case has to do with the American War with Communist North Vietnam during the 1960s. Now, this war was quite costly to our army, with a total casualties on the American side amounting to about 90,000 personnel. Additionally, the war was very difficult strategically due to Vietnam's geography, which consisted of jungles and hills, and Vietnam's use of guerrilla warfare, which uses strategies like ambushes, booby traps, and blending in with the civilian populations. These issues led Senator Robert F. Kennedy giving a speech in Chicago that proposed the withdrawal of military from Vietnam. He exposed that progress was minimal. Alban, would you like to introduce how this case began?
Sure. So pretty much, as you mentioned, Kennedy's speech, it gained the support of many, including 3 students from Des Moines Independent School District who decided to show support for this proposal by wearing black armbands. And the students that wore these armbands were John Tinker, Mary Beth Tinker, and Christopher Egghardt. However, the principal of their school, they eventually found out about their plans and decided to put a ban on wearing black armbands, with the consequence of suspension if violated. The principal of the school feared that wearing these armbands would cause a disruption in the learning environment. However, even with the threat of suspension, the students persisted in their choice to wear these armbands, and thus they got suspended numerous times. After they finished their demonstration of support for Kennedy's proposal, with the assistance of their parents, they sued the school district, claiming that it violated their right to the freedom of speech. And this case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, after being ignored in the lower courts and being appealed in the Circuit of Appeals.
Thank you, sir. I personally think it's kind of crazy how something as small as armbands can entail such a consequence. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Who knew that this case would get that deep?
Yeah, so anyways, what was the ruling and what are your thoughts on the ruling?
So basically, to keep it short, the court essentially ruled that schools do not possess authority over students' fundamental rights, because that would be totalitarian and also anti-democratic. So subsequently, authorities also cannot control the right of students to freedom of speech. Students may express themselves however they will, as long as they don't quote-unquote disrupt the school's primary function. And that function could be things like teaching, administration, etc. Disrupt is an interesting word, and specifically in the case, they say that disrupt could be flexible depending on the situation. And so I think it's interesting to note that disrupt is a flexible word.
I see, but like one thing I'd like to ask is why is the word disrupt so vague and flexible, I suppose?
In my opinion, it's because pretty much there are different situations and environments, and in those situations and environments there are different standards. For example, in a McDonald's, it would be okay for you to show up in pajamas and watch YouTube while eating. However, if you go to a fancy or renowned restaurant, unlike McDonald's, it would quote-unquote disrupt or take away from their atmosphere and formality. And so you can see that disrupt is very different depending on where you are and what's happening.
Okay, I see. That's a pretty valid response. But anyways, continuing on, just as Abe Fortes gave the official verdict, with the total vote going 7-2, which is a large but yet not complete majority. Aban, what do you believe are the possible reasons for the opposing 2 judges to oppose this verdict?
I think it's pretty interesting that there was 2 judges who opposed this verdict, and so my opinion on that is that they mostly did it to prevent incivility from breaking out. For example, there may be some kids who disagree with each other, and they decide to maybe mobilize against each other. And so eventually it would become a hot mess like many protests you see today.
That's a great response, and the judges who opposed fought similarly. They opposed it because they wanted quote-unquote peace. Judge Black, one of the opposing judges, said, "Uncontrolled and uncontrollable liberty is an enemy to domestic peace. Additionally, he said that discipline is an integral and important part of training our children to be good citizens. While I think this is quite a valid response because we don't want people growing up rogue, per se, and doing whatever they please, even the government themselves do this to some degree, for example, in smoking and alcohol laws. However, the whole notion of limiting freedom does go against the concept of America that we built ourselves upon, freedom of speech and expression. I can see why this opinion doesn't pass and pretty much loses majority of vote.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it does have some validity. It's not grounded in our American basis, essentially. And so, I also think that the impact of this case is quite interesting, as schools today would be quite different without the passing of this verdict given by Justice Fortas. And so, this case it essentially ensures that students retain their constitutional rights to free speech and expression within the school environment. By standing with the principle that students do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate, the case has created sort of a framework that promotes intellectual freedom and civic engagement. I think that without this decision, schools might have been prone to covering up student expression, potentially deterring creativity and hindering the development of critical thinking skills. Additionally, Tinker versus Des Moines has developed a culture of accountability within the educational systems and institutions, preventing arbitrary punishments and encouraging more fair and more thorough disciplinary processes. And so these are some of the impacts that I think this case has had on modern schooling and education.
I think that's a great way to sum it up.
Alright, so now that we've introduced the court case and had some discussion, let's move on to our guest's perspective. But before we do that, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Are you tired of biased news and censorship? Get the Uncensored News Digest, where freedom of the press is paramount. Stay informed with unfiltered, independent journalism from around the world. Knowledge should never be censored.
And we're back. Joining us now is Nathan, who has extensive knowledge and research in censorship. Welcome, Nathan.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Well, let's start off with the questions. Firstly, do you believe students should have the right to express their opinions freely in schools, even if those opinions are controversial or unpopular? Why or why not?
Ultimately, if it's going to be one or the other, I'm going to say yes, students should have the right to express their opinions freely, because if they don't, then they would be deprived of their first constitutional right, or First Amendment right, which is freedom of speech, essentially, freedom to protest, freedom of the press. And if in like any institution, even a school, blocks these rights, then it's unconstitutional and therefore illegal against our country's laws.
I see, thank you. Well, what if it could become destructive to the environment? Then what would you say?
If that's the case, then I would say schools do have the authority to exercise what can and cannot be said, because if it's harming like the learning environment, which is the main priority of the school, then I feel like they have the school has the authority to stop what is being said and that's causing problems.
All right, thank you.
That's interesting.
Continue.
Sure, that's a good response. So the next question for you is, in your opinion, what role should schools play in balancing students' freedom of speech with the need to maintain order and discipline?
Well, it's gonna tie back to like what I said earlier. Obviously, like someone can't just yell like I have a bomb in my backpack. Obviously, that would be like something like that you shouldn't say. But it does arise like a gray area in freedom of speech, because freedom of speech entails that you're able to say like anything or like whatever you want. But then again, if you say something that dangerous, then something has to be done, because you're putting other people in harm or under the assumption that they are in harm. So I'm gonna tie it back to what I said earlier and say that schools should like have like some sort of regulation of what can and can't be said. So it would help maintain this order and discipline in like a learning environment.
I see. That's
That's
quite
pretty good.
insightful. Yeah.
All right, so now relating to our court case, How do you think the outcome of Tinker versus Des Moines has influenced the way that young people perceive their rights and freedoms in school environments today?
Well, I mean, these days, like people are kind of becoming more and more aware of their rights, and then obviously something that has arisen from this Supreme Court case, which is very influential, and it's like one of the strongest court cases essentially. I feel like people are becoming more aware of their rights, and then kind of exercising them to a point where they're saying that their freedom of speech or something is being uh, suppressed or retaliated against, and to which I feel like um, for the most part it isn't, but they're just trying to find some way to make the school or whatever is trying to block them from saying whatever they want to say. And if it's something bad, it's just trying to stop them um, from saying what they want. And even sometimes they know that it's bad, but they're just trying to pull something so that they can say that they have the right to say it, when in reality it's kind of like a gray area. But in that gray area, I feel like it should be stopped.
I see. So you think students take their freedom of expression to the extreme, is what you're saying?
I feel like yes, because ultimately if someone's being silenced, then they're gonna speak out about it for the most part.
So I have one more question for you. So what do you think the world would be like today in America if this court case had not passed the verdict that it passed?
I think it would definitely become more like I mean it's kind of extreme, but dystopian kind of. I don't know if you guys are aware of the text, George Orwell's 1984. I feel like it'd be something like that, where there's like a higher power that's trying to silence the people. I mean, I know it wouldn't be as strong in the public, but in the schools, certainly pretty strong, because people wouldn't be able to say what they want. And then when they don't get to say what they want, they feel like they can't really express themselves for who they are, which violates like essentially our country's own ideology, like the land of the free. You know, America, you're supposed to be able to say whatever you want and get your opinion out.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
great
true.
reference, and I feel like it also connects to Fahrenheit 451, where people aren't allowed to express the love of reading and education and deeper thinking.
And also like the Hunger Games, where the lack of the ability to speak up leads people to becoming oppressed and things like that. So yeah, there's definitely the issue of becoming dystopian if this case did not pass. So that's a great response.
Yes, thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. But before this podcast ends, we would like to present our respective sponsors, Anonymous Insights. Unlike the court case where you can face trial and shame for your political views, Anonymous Insights empowers you to share your ideas, views, and perspectives anonymously, 100% anonymously. No longer do you have to fear about being judged by the world. Download Anonymous Insights today.
And with that, we reached the end of another enlightening episode of The Unbleepables. We hope you've gained valuable insights into the Tinker versus Des Moines case and its enduring impact on our society today. Join us next time for more thought-provoking discussions, and until then, stay curious and keep questioning the status quo. Goodbye for now.